Now, Michelle, let's start with these earnings reports. Is this just a case where the expectations were too low, or has the outcome really been that historic?
I'd say it's a combination of very conservative expectations because no one really knew what to predict out of the pandemic, and then a better than expected stronger recovery here with the GDP forecasted at 6 to 8%, from obviously vaccine having a lot to do with it. But what's muting the reaction right now, you would think the market would have rocketed to new highs, and in certain sectors it did, like for transportation, which we'll talk about later. But if you're looking at NASDAQ after some incredible earnings out of Amazon and Apple and Facebook, they actually were red today, and NASDAQ is sort of struggling here to maintain itself. So I would say that it's a lot has to do with inflation concerns, a lot has to do with some chip shortages, but so we're not really at a necessary historic earnings season or particularly unexpected at this point.
Okay, well, that's interesting to note there. Now, I know another thing that has been a big topic of conversation is this new spending bill. Democrats want $2.3 trillion. Republicans offered a $568 billion compromise that they say is actually focused on infrastructure. Now, the White House says there will be talks this week, but what are the odds of success here, and is it having an impact on the market at all right now?
Well, if you look strictly at the transportation sector, which would be under the umbrella of the ETF IYT, that is one of the areas that did extraordinarily well today. It actually went to new all-time highs. So you're looking at a level of optimism there, regardless of what happens in politics. How much money actually gets passed through remains to be seen, but I think the general consensus at this point is that there will be a bill, and it's a very necessary bill. Now, of course, one of the bigger concerns, besides obviously spending that the Republicans do not want to see spending on, like tax credits, et cetera, is these inflation concerns that we keep coming back to, affecting the market all over the place. Because right now, the passage would mean more government spending. And yes, there is the concern of how is it paid for, but government spending right now adds to the debt, and we're already seeing some pretty high-flying inflation prices.
Yeah, now I want to talk a little bit more about the chances of inflation, because we heard that if Biden's plan or some form of it is successful, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is already saying she's not worried about inflation because the money would be spread out over the next decade. Is the risk of rising inflation still something investors are worried about right now?
Absolutely. I understand what Yellen's saying if you do look at it amortize over the course of time. But if you just look at the last 6 months, 6 to 8 months, we're already seeing tremendous increase in food prices, in copper prices, steel. We're seeing lumber going up. Now all of a sudden you've got gold and silver starting to actually look like they're getting some life here with inflation concerns. All of this based on low supply chain and also delays within the supply chain are impacting raw material prices, and eventually I think we're going to see those really reflected in the consumer price index. So I actually believe that that's why, going back to your initial conversation when you opened up the show about cryptocurrencies, there is an inflation component there that the younger generations are using to hedge. And with all of these prices going up and up and up, we're seeing the concern in the market. Of course, we have to watch the interest rates very carefully. And then thirdly, I think you need to keep your eye right here what happens with gold and silver, because if they wake up, it could really be very, very interesting. And then one more thing would be oil, which is sort of the X factor also waking up here. And if it gets back towards $70 a barrel and higher, that could really push everything over the edge.
Yeah, and I know this is one of those cases where a lot of people rely on those top U.S. officials to give them some sense of calm, but at the same time, we have to continue to watch the market and, of course, everything that's going on across the United States and how that's having an impact. Excellent points to consider here. Michelle Snyder, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.